All right, so what do you think? Should we get started? Go ahead and get going. All right, well, thanks for coming to hear me talk about ICS attack surface. I am Jason Holcomb, and what I want to talk with you today about are some things that end up in places that you don't expect, or things that end up showing up in strange ways, kind of like the picture that you see here. All right, has anybody used this site called the Wirecutter to read reviews? Anybody seen this? Okay, I was hoping for more of a response from that. Well, one of the things they do is they do all these product reviews, and they always start off the product review with asking this question, how do you know that you can trust us, or why trust us? And so I thought I'd do the same thing here. So why trust me to talk about some of these things related to industrial control system security? And part of it is that the big number one reason is that I actually was, even though I don't live here now, I grew up here in Oklahoma, over in the little northeast corner there, in the Grove and Grand Lake area. So it's great to be back here with a bunch of fellow Oklahomans, although I've talked to people from all over today, so it's not just an Oklahoma crowd. But I was hoping that, playing that card would help me out here in building some trust. But in addition to that, I've spent the last 12 or 14 years working in the control system security world, crawling around in places like this power plant that you see here, and oil platforms, and that sort of thing. So along the way, I've collected some war stories, I'm going to call them, and I'm going to share those with you today, specifically around finding some attack surface in places that you might not expect it in this kind of environment. And what is this environment that we're talking about exactly? A few years ago, we were talking about industrial control systems and these sort of heavy industry applications like electric utilities and oil and gas and manufacturing. And then this thing with embedded device security started happening, and then the Internet of Things. And so we ended up with this sort of mix of terms and terminology, and I don't think it's real clear in everyone's mind. And I think it helps to kind of level set where I'm coming from, so you can kind of help understand the things that I'm going to share with you today. And I'm hoping that what I'm able to share with you will help you either from the perspective of sort of the defender and understanding the kinds of things that you can do to better protect your environments, and even if you're not someone who has that kind of responsibility for actually defending an industrial control system environment, I think there's some things you can take away from here as well. And if you happen to be in the position like I am, where you're doing testing and assessments of these systems, I'm hoping you can take away some maybe new rocks to turn over and some things to look at when you're doing evaluations in these environments. All that to say, to help us level set here, on the industrial control system side that you see in the top circle of our Venn diagram there, this is sort of the historic, the way that we think about control systems. But like I said, things are evolving a little bit. So on the bottom right there, you see this Internet of Things concept. And there's some similarities, right? There's some overlap. There, just the way that these systems work. And I've tried to highlight a few of those in some of these intersections here. And really the space that we're in, this industrial control system world, is changing. So you see the arrow that I've got there, sort of trending into this industrial Internet of Things. And that's affecting some industries more than others. But what it means is that we're bringing in a lot of different ways, little different parts of the technology that make it harder to sort of isolate those systems and just keep them separate over here to the side, right? And this is a trend that started years ago as they started moving out of the world of serial communications and into IP communications, and increased need from data from the business networks that was started pushing more connectivity. And soon all of these systems that were really designed to be isolated and islanded weren't that way anymore. And now you start layering on some of the data analytics and cloud aspects of this, and the picture gets even a little more convoluted. And you see that we're kind of evolving from even what we used to consider these traditional ICS systems into more of this industrial Internet of Things. So so I guess I wanted to use this to kind of level set and say, what I'm talking about are the industrial applications of these things here, not necessarily the consumer side, IoT. There are fascinating topics there, with what happened last year with the Mirai botnet, and there's a lot of things going on in that world, and some of it intersects here. But really the perspective I'm coming from is this ICS and industrial Internet of Things side, and kind of, again, here to share some stories with you about that. So there was a talk earlier today that was kind of the scary wake-up call. Here's how bad things are, in these kind of environments. It kind of laid a good foundation if you happen to catch that one. And I'll hit on just a couple of things here. If you haven't been exposed to this world, again, it was a lot of these systems were not designed with security in mind, so they're sort of open by default, and so they have these insecure by design issues in them, so that the software configurations, even the protocols, don't require authentication. Lots of issues that you've seen with PLCs, the embedded device side of these industrial control system applications. So those are known issues. Those are things that we've been talking about for quite a while for those of us that have been focused on this problem, as well as all of the software vulnerabilities that go along with it. So, communicating out to all these, connected devices in a substation, electric substation, or in an oil and gas application, there's software, right? So we've got software, we've got operating systems sitting there in an environment that perhaps doesn't get as much attention as they should from a patching and doing all the good hygiene sorts of things. And again, what I'm sharing here are some of the known issues, and then what we're going to pivot to is some things that I've observed just encountering all these systems that are sort of outside of this normal box, right? So fairly common to see these insecure protocols, fairly common to see unpatched Windows boxes, for example. How much MS-0867 do you want, because it's out there? But in some ways, and in some applications, in some places, it's progressed beyond that. And so our assessment techniques and our defensive techniques also have to move beyond some of those fundamentals. And I'm hoping what I share with you today will show you a few of the areas that I've seen that if you've got everything else kind of locked down that fits into this known issue category, then we've got some other things still to look at. So you might think that with all of the challenges that we're really just have a problem here with security on these systems, and in some places that's true. But again, I think we're progressing. A lot of industries have started making significant investments, including electric utilities and oil and gas, and starting to in some of the heavy manufacturing as well. So we're moving out of this world where everything is not that great when it comes to configuration. And part of the way that we're that historically that's been done is kind of like the fence that's around this electric substation right here. We've sort of walled off, and fenced. Again, the isolation aspect of that's one way that, historically we've tried to protect these systems that are fragile. Like it was mentioned today earlier, there are, cases where a single packet can cause some of these devices with fragile IP stacks to fall over. And so, the natural thing to want to do, in addition to start that long path of building better systems and building better components, is to kind of wall that off. And like I said, in a lot of places, this is starting to, this is happening, and things are getting a little better. But there are still a few things out there that I want to talk to you about today that present an attack surface opportunity for ICS that maybe kind of like the dog sitting on the cat pedestal, aren't what you would expect to see in these systems. So the first one I want to talk about, and it's afternoon time here, and it's like sleepy time, I can tell. So we've had lunch, we've had one of the other talks. So we'll try to get some interaction going here. Like, who can tell me, what does this little symbol mean? What am I going to talk about in this number one thing? Databases. Bingo. Thank you. We have audience interaction. Success. So databases are probably more common than you think in these systems. And the reason I say that is because you think of some of these specialized control system SCADA and DCS applications, and you just think of it all as being very proprietary, and that's a pretty common perspective. But what has been enlightening to me over the course of the last 10 to 12 years of doing assessments on these systems is how many sort of off-the-shelf DBMS tools there are out there. The Oracle and MS SQL, and so they're out there and they exist. So what you see on the left, and I'm going to, in case you've never seen this sort of representation of a control system environment before, this is based off of the Purdue reference architecture. On the top level there, you see sort of your enterprise IT zone, and then kind of in between there, you've got this DMZ world that is sort of sits in between the plant or the control system environment. You have the control zone in that layer 3 where you might find some things that look a little bit like traditional IT. And then the further you go down, the further you get away from the look and feel of traditional IT. You get more into the controllers and instrumentation and the things that are actually down, actuating a breaker or taking some physical action in the kinetic world, or measuring something in the physical world down at that lower level. So that's the concept we're setting up there. And I put the little database icon to show that often there are, at multiple levels, different database applications that are running. And why do you think that is? What are some things that up on the IT, the top level of this, that we might want to know about from a control system environment? Lots of things to inform business decisions need to happen up at that level that are coming from the control system environment. So there's a lot of database communications that happen there. So a few things about the database that you see in the bullet points here. The first one is sometimes these things are buried into these applications, and that's part of what makes them look like it's proprietary. So you go talk to a control system engineer or an instrumentation and automation technician, they may not know that their application has an Oracle database embedded into it. That's very common because the vendor has made it to look and feel like it's all part of that particular SCADA application. And you're going to find these in various places. So I/O servers, historians, configuration repositories, just in a variety of places, right? And again, they may not even be aware that they're there. Part of the reason is sometimes the file structure, is for those of us who have worked with Oracle in the past, you're used to looking for certain directory structure. That may be buried 10 directory levels under whatever the application is. And unless you've actually, looked at the services running on the box, done some kind of interrogation, of that, you may not even be aware of what's running there. Minor point here is that sometimes this stuff ends up, because it's kind of wrapped in the control system application shell, it sometimes looks a little bit more like it's embedded part of that application. Sometimes that means that it's running on a non-standard port even. So why, when we look at this, what's the problem here? What is the security issue that comes to the forefront? And I've seen just over assessment after assessment, here is the sort of trifecta that causes the problem of databases and control system applications. It's this starting with default creds on the left there. It's a rampant issue. Again, if you're an administrator for one of these systems and you don't even know that there's a database there, and it was kind of designed to be open anyway, they're going to be default credentials in there. There are very few that I've ran across that have actually taken care of this fully. And if they're not default credentials, like the list that you might go pull down, or for Oracle, or what's embedded in some of the scanning tools inside of Kali, if you know the names of the application, or you can go do a little Google hacking, you probably can find some of the default accounts very easily. And I've seen that played out in assessment after assessment. But just getting into the database is kind of interesting. So you might be able to log in, you might give you some more information about the system, you can dump some tables and take a look at things, but it's this additional level of weak configuration that becomes even more interesting. Things like being able to execute XP or Windows level shell commands out of your database, right? That's a configuration problem. In most of the modern systems, this is something that's disabled. Well, that may be an overstatement. But in the control system world, it's not something that people have paid attention to. So very often you can move from having access to a database, elevating your privileges, exploiting the weak configuration to run whatever it is that you want to run, and then you gain a foothold out of some untrusted zone that you're coming from into a more trusted zone. And then you see the attack path where I'm able to progress. Maybe I've got a lot of controls around a lot of other parts of the network environment that would keep me from moving from the enterprise, level 4 and 5 down to level 3.5. But the database opens this tiny little window that allows me to jump in. And again, something I've seen in numerous places. Examples of where I've seen this. Oracle example for an oil and gas environment where it was doing exactly so. That model of the Purdue reference architecture, it was exposing the control system up to a higher level of the network, and was creating a vulnerability from that perspective. Another example, electric I/O and system configuration. Exposed through a misconfigured, and this time it was a Microsoft SQL database server. Same kind of issue where it was creating that opportunity or creating that attack surface that someone could use to gain access to the control system environment. And then the last example here was one in a recent pen test where we had an objective to move from the IT environment into the industrial control system environment in a very controlled manner that's tightly controlled with rules of engagement, in case anyone is concerned about that. One of the ways that we found in was through a database that was used for regulatory compliance. Again, very similar situation to these other two. It was what created the opportunity for us to gain a foothold and gain a pivot point into the ICS environment from the corporate IT side. So in summary, for the database, we're going to go through a couple more of these, and we're going to follow kind of the same format. So we'll give the introduction to what this attack surface is. We'll cover some stories about where it was a problem, and then we'll kind of do this summary slide of what the issue is. So again, it's database management software creating this attack surface in ICS that you may not be aware of. And again, we're trying to focus here on things that might kind of fall outside the radar. If it's not something you're specifically looking for, it doesn't fall under the normal, sort of Windows and network vulnerability assessment. It might be something you would miss. And I think we've hit all of these points, except let me talk just a little bit about how do you test for this. So, I've already mentioned that scanning in some environments can be problematic just because of the fragile nature of the devices that live in those environments. If you know what's there well enough, that can be done in a controlled manner from particularly in the further up you are in that Purdue reference architecture. We've again, done that under careful control, and usually it's you're doing things like, saying to the control system engineer, excuse me, I'm going to scan this particular device now. Let's understand what happens if it goes offline. Let's understand if it impacts the system. And you walk through that, and they say, okay, well it's a historian server sitting in a DMZ. The impact if something happens to it is minimal. Okay, go ahead and scan it. And scanning here, we can go in as much depth as we want. I'm happy to talk more about this offline as well. But this scanning here, I mean, this could be everything from just network discovery with Nmap. It could also be targeted scanning. Once you identify that you have a database, let's say it's Oracle, sort of one of my go-to tools for that is OScanner. And you can pop up OScanner, and it will do some of the default credential checks. In an Oracle database, you're going to need to know the SID or be able to use some tools to guess the SID. That's usually not that hard, and that's the kind of first hurdle. So there are some tools you can use to help with this. In addition to that, there's manual configuration inspection. So there's actually just digging into these boxes, figuring out what's running on them, looking at what services are running. And shockingly, a lot of the times, no one has taken the time to do that. So if you're in the position where you are the defender for this kind of environment, this is, the call to action for you is to really understand how that system is working, both at a host level as well as the network level, so that you can understand if you've got this kind of attack surface issue. On the how do I fix it column, this is going to be kind of a theme as we talk through the various topics here. Obviously, we want to reduce that attack surface. If we can do that with a network control and not impact the operation of the system, that's a starting point. If we can then further lock that down at the host and database configuration level, that's great. Sometimes that means that you're getting on the phone or working with your control system vendor or integrator to actually make that change happen in a way that doesn't affect production operations. And I can't stress that enough. In these environments, it's not a place where you want to be testing things in production, right? You want to understand what the impact of a change is going to be. So any change that you introduce could be detrimental to the environment. Therefore, know what you're doing, and a lot of times that means working with a control system vendor to do it. All right, so number 2. And we only have 3 of these, so I promise I won't bore you to tears. Well, I might bore you to tears, but it'll be short. So the second one that I want to talk about is, who wants to guess the icon? Wireless. Why would you have wireless in a control system? Well, it's all over the place. In various applications, various types of systems, it is used in the industrial control environment. So we're going to start by talking about industrial wireless. Just a couple of stories here. Early days of Zigbee, there were a lot of challenges with different vendors' implementations. Some of the early smart grid, home area network applications had some serious challenges, and there were issues there that were exposing from the home area network side of things back into the SCADA environment, depending on how the architecture was set up. So that's one place where we've seen it. Another example of something we've seen is a wireless HART. So wireless HART is another industrial protocol. And in this instance, it was for an oil and gas sensor network. And the way that the controller was configured, it had a vulnerability that allowed you to gain access to that environment. You'll see over on the far right there a little snippet from a Shodan search. And you can see that a lot of these things end up getting connected directly to the internet. And so you've got, the case where you've got vulnerable industrial wireless connected to the internet, just not a great situation for the control system. And great for convenience for people that might need to access it, but not great from a security perspective when they're a remote access vulnerabilities in that. As I was putting this together over the past couple of weeks, I noticed one of my friends in the industry here was also doing some research in wireless HART and put out a tweet about building this sniffer and found hard-coded backdoor in the vendor's non-upgradable gateway. So there are challenges for wireless in the industrial side, and again, this is one that I find that people, one, either they're aware of wireless applications in the control system side but believe that it's proprietary enough that there aren't vulnerabilities in it, or they're just not aware that there's that much wireless happening in these environments. And part of that depends on kind of which industry maybe you spent the most time in. For me, I kind of grew up in the electric utility world, spent the first part of my career in the electric utility world, and there were certain applications where I would just be surprised, well, why would you even think about using wireless here if you've got some other option? But the game changed, right? Between the massive distribution and the smart metering, advanced metering infrastructures, the game changed, and you needed those kind of the reach that wireless communication provides. And we're not covering by any means a comprehensive list. There are a lot of different industrial wireless protocols and different stories to go along with those, but that's a couple examples. But wait, that's not all, right? It's not just industrial wireless that exist in these systems. There's also Wi-Fi, 802.11x Wi-Fi out in these environments, and I would say. We'll just take them example by example. So in the manufacturing world, we've come across this several times where you've got an application for barcode scanners. They need to roam around the plant to do something, and they're communicating over Wi-Fi because it was the technology that worked at the time that the system was implemented. And hey, they might have even turned on security in 2005 or whenever it was that it was implemented. That's actually fairly recent history in control system life cycle sometimes. But it's using web. And the challenge we run into here is, on the face of it, it's like, okay, well, these are scanners. They don't really do much. But what that does is it provides an entry point for someone sitting outside of that plant to, break web, which a shocker that would be possible, right? I mean, but but it provides an entry point into the network, and then it becomes a question of what is it connected to, beyond just that barcode scanning application. Okay, well, it's connected to this broader manufacturing network, which is also connected to the business network. And by the way, the egress controls don't really prevent you from getting out of the manufacturing world back into the business network. So it becomes another entry point, and maybe I tend to focus a lot on protecting the critical infrastructure, protecting the operations, the production process, and the industrial control system. But sometimes the industrial control system also is the entry point that could become an attack back into the business environment as well. And that's exactly what had happened in this manufacturing example. This was an interesting one. There was a guest wireless network for an electric utility client, and they didn't realize, just due to the way that this thing was configured, that it was actually possible to enumerate all of their control system IP space. Not exploit level stuff where I'm gaining access, but I could map out all of the control system space from the guest wireless. That's probably not ideal, not an immediate thing, like someone's going to exploit this today, but not really what you want to have in place. Simple configuration fix there, fortunately. And then another fun one, ran across this where someone, and you got to hand it to these guys, right, for, building a solution to their problem, right? So they bought a couple of Linksys routers, threw DD-Word on them, made a little point-to-point environment so they could extend the control system in this power generation environment. So many challenges there, right? It's like, okay, how did, I understand that in that environment, you got to just make things work sometimes. But it created a vulnerability again that was allowing access into a sensitive area of the network. Probably a better way that we can do that. I will say, so again, I'm giving you a lot of stories about things that are way less than ideal. But I don't want to paint such a negative picture, because I will say that in electric utility world especially, a lot of organizations have gotten better about change control and things that would prevent something like this point-to-point wireless thing from happening. Not everywhere, not all, but some. There is hope. All right, so following the format again here, this is sort of the summary slide. I will say, so on the wireless side, it's actually a little bit easier to test for that, just because you can do it passively to get an idea of what's at a particular site. And there's a lot of configuration inspection that goes there. So I mentioned Shodan here just also because we looked at that wireless controller that was sitting out there. So that's certainly something that's of interest, and someone else had that up on slides earlier too, if you're not familiar with that. This is another one that can be difficult when it comes time for remediation. Like, how do you actually strengthen these things, make it better? In this case, sometimes it does. Like, let's take the manufacturing example. Either you're going to segment that off, which would be one option, or you're going to see if that technology is upgradable. Unfortunately, sometimes due to the age or just the way that those systems were designed from the beginning, they're not upgradable, and it makes it more difficult to secure. So you do some things to try to manage it, segmentation. Fortunately, this is not specific to wireless, but on the embedded device security side of things, the industry is moving forward. A lot of vendors now are offering, stronger, better defendable, if that's proper grammar, embedded devices, out in the control system space. It's not perfect. We're not, all the way there yet, but it is getting better. And as things, as we move forward in this world of industrial IoT and a lot more connected things, there are challenges around that we'll continue to have to solve. All right, this one is not quite as clear as database and wireless, because it just looks like a laptop, right? Any guesses as to what I'm going to talk about here? What was that? That would be a good one, and we're not too far. That's close, but I heard somebody else. Unsecured terminal, yeah, that kind of fits into that. What I'm gonna talk about under this little icon here is remote access mechanisms, and it could kind of fall under both of those sort of things. It's not too hard to imagine why someone would need or want to have remote access into the industrial control system environment. There are just a number of different scenarios you can think of, not the least of which is, having a need for vendor support, right? So I can't have always the vendor representative right here ready to go setting out the terminal, so I need to find a way to provide that access for them. And so people do find a way to get from here to there in sometimes very interesting and clever ways. And this first example, it was just an unfortunate combination of configuration problems. The concept of auto login or auto log on in the control system environments, while if you come from an IT background and you see that, you'd be like, why in the world would you ever have a machine that was actually configured to auto log on in any kind of enterprise or operational environment? There are some times where you want that. Maybe the application depends on that box starting up, and this is the way that the vendor has chosen to implement that. But then you run into situations where it's like, okay, you've got this really bad combination of auto login, of administrator with a blank password, and RDP is enabled. not a great situation. The other interesting one here, ran into the situation where the IP KVM for all of the control system servers was connected to the IT network. Again, we're talking about attack surface here. So now I'm able to access from the IT network the KVM switch that's connected to the control system computers. And there are multiple challenges with that KVM controller, including default credentials, remotely exploitable vulnerabilities. There's just a number of different things that were creating a problem there that, again, created an attack surface that if you weren't looking for this stuff on the IT side of the network, or you weren't crawling around in the server room for that industrial control system application, you might not ever know. And I guess the other thing to add to that list, or if you weren't actively talking to the people that were using that, control system engineers or administrators for that environment. So that's another example. And then all of the remote access software, everything that you can think of has been used in these environments for exactly the reason that we talked about, some of the vendor support issues, internal remote support. I can VPN into my corporate environment. Now I want to be able to jump to the industrial control system environment so I don't have to drive in to do something. And there are valid cases. The answer can't be, no, you can't do that, because I just, from experience, that won't, and in most environments, that won't work very long, unless you're, in something nuclear power, has sort of a special set of circumstances around it. But in most environments, you need to have some kind of emergency remote access capability available. And if you're not proactive about setting that up in a secure way, guess what? Somebody will find a way to do it and work around you. So what do you do about that? So obviously, there's a lot of different testing methods and testing opportunities that you can do to identify, these kinds of remote access solutions, we'll call them. But then when it comes time to fixing it, again, I think the best thing here is to be proactive and have something that's actually set up and approved to use for that remote access ahead of time. And I'm a big fan of having some things that are set up with like a connect and disconnect mechanism. And I've seen this implemented in some pretty creative ways where even a control system operator maybe can toggle a switch that turns on access. So maybe it turns on, one of them I did one time was it turned on a little media converter that then enabled access from the business network temporarily, over a restricted set of ports. And it's sort of an emergency remote access feature that could be toggled on and off. You have some other controls around that, like reports that come in if that's left open for longer than a certain threshold. So this is the remote access attack surface. Again, being proactive, I think about finding ways to configure this ahead of time is probably the best bet here. But then also, regular assessment and testing for this sort of thing is critical as well. All right, so we're getting close to the end here. A few conclusions that I want to leave you with. Again, I really wanted to just share some more stories and maybe get you thinking a little bit differently about where some of the exposure might be coming from the industrial control system side of things. Really, that thorough assessment is important for understanding the posture of your ICS. And you can't look at it even just in isolation. For some of the reasons we saw, there's this concept of inherited risk and inherited vulnerabilities, to all of the networks that the ICS is connected to. And that could be your business network environment. It could be third-party providers that have a connection. It could be business partners, lots of different examples of things where you've got interconnection and you really need to understand if that connection is also creating risk in my environment. So that's the first thing, thorough assessment. The second thing, I guess, is a takeaway here is some of these small details like whether or not you checked for default passwords and disabled those in your Oracle database that's buried in your control system application, it makes a big difference. I can have, a fantastic, cybersecurity program that puts me at the top of the maturity level across all of the NIST cybersecurity framework categories, and I can feel really good about that. But some of the details of understanding down to that level of database accounts and what is the attack surface they're creating, those things become really important. And then lastly, and you've heard me echo this probably several times throughout, we are making this better. This situation is not hopeless, and I don't want to paint that picture. We have real challenges in all of these networks, and there are challenges that are specific to manufacturing and specific to electric and specific to oil and gas, and even different areas within those sort of industry verticals. But there are, in a lot of places, there are things that are getting better. We're doing a lot of these assessments where we're discovering these things. I'm hoping that by passing on some of these things that we've seen to you, it gives you some inspiration for how you can check, how you can make things better in your own environments if you happen to have any responsibility for these industrial control system networks. So that's really it for me. I think we do have a little bit of time here for questions and discussion. I did want to make sure I thank Bsides Oklahoma. Again, I live over in Missouri now, but it was great to come back to Oklahoma here and be here for the day. Any questions out there? Is anyone still awake? All right. Well, thank you guys very much. It's been a pleasure being here, and I hope to talk to you more out in the hall. And if you think of any other question, any question for me, I'll be around. Thanks.